I can come back here if folks still need it, but I'm going to go ahead and navigate over here and see what folks are starting to put in. And you can see the code at the top of this page as well.
So it looks like social media is the clear winner here.
Yeah, for sure. However, definitely diversity of responses. And I really appreciate whoever put academics on Twitter because, you know, I seek out and get information there, but it never would have occurred to me to share it in this way. I just don't actively think of that as a thing that I'm doing, even though I do.
And, you know, I would be curious to hear what other people have to say about this, but in my experience with students and in teaching information literacy classes, many of them access their news and information via social media as well.
I appreciate that John Wiswell's LibGuide has been put as a source. We actually have that at the end of our presentation. I'm not sure we let John know and he's here today, but as a place to sort of go for resources as well.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Yeah, so I think there's a few more coming in, but really we just sort of wanted to sort of, as I assumed would happen, display that there is so much information available and we are seeking out, whether actively or passively, information about COVID in a number of ways. So it makes sense that we would sort of be more critical and direct when assessing and taking this information in. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and navigate forward. Oops, Mark already did.
And so this we don't have in the form of a Mentimeter poll, but you know, this is the type of question that we often ask when, you know, librarians teach those information literacy sessions. You know, when faculty bring students into the library, typically tied to an assignment, class assignment, but we often have conversations with students about the characteristics of what is considered a credible source. What does credibility mean? And would love to hear from you all what you think of some of the characteristics of a source, credible source are. So feel free to type those into the chat box or unmute yourselves and just kind of shout out criteria that you consider when you're looking for sources online. What do you consider to be a mark of credibility? Okay, thank you, Jonathan and Karen. So if you're not keeping an eye on the chat, domains ending in .edu, which typically are college and university websites. Karen suggested information from the medical community, Kathy from the CDC for sure. Ross suggests from a government or publicly funded agency. Yep, absolutely. Oh, good one, Teresa. Yeah, transparency about limitations of knowledge. So the writers or scholars are being transparent about any potential limitations. That is always the mark of a good source. Yep, CDC, Health Department, for sure. Great, thanks everyone. All right, Molly, if you wouldn't mind advancing, please.
Yeah, so what we have here are generally what we consider and what many folks consider to be the top 4 areas that you should be considering when evaluating sources generally, as well as related to COVID. And I sort of noticed, in the previous slide, when Mark asked the question, some of us, we weren't sharing necessarily characteristics of reliable sources, but what we consider to be reliable sources. And I would assume that's with some of this in mind, right? So we'll just cover these quickly. So an author's level of expertise, and I just want to say this is all on a spectrum. I very much disagree with this idea of good article and bad article. There's a lot of in between and in the middle, right? And so this is just for us to consider as a whole contextual piece. So the author's level of expertise. This is especially important with COVID when there are so many opinions and so many pieces of advice right now. What is the author's credentials? Are they a scientist? Are they a journalist specializing in health issues or healthcare? That's just something to consider. Generally, you can find more information on an author by clicking on the author's name on the article, or even doing a Google search for the author, just to sort of figure out that level of expertise. The author's point of view, I think this one is often overlooked. This is just really what is, again, that author's background. In the past, have they had strong opinions on healthcare or states' rights or those types of things? I mean, are they a politician, for example? They might very much have a particular point of view. Or are they someone in a health community? They might have a little bit of a more scientific point of view. So again, just another thing to consider. So publication date, I mean, oftentimes we're told, depending on our type of research, to consider more recent publications. I would say that publication date matters very much in regards to COVID because there's so much new information daily. Because if I'm looking at recommendations from 3 months ago, they might vary greatly of what the recommendations are today. So anything that I'm looking at regarding COVID, of course, look at past publications, but I just think right now when there's not a lot of research, but there's new research every day, and the CDC's recommendations are changing, you really do want to consider that publication date. And I'm sure most of us here today, we realize when we're doing a Google search, we're not necessarily getting the most recent publications that are coming up first, but we're getting whatever search results match our algorithm or whichever ones the advertisers think are best, that type of thing. And so appropriateness for your research need. This could be reframed as appropriateness for what you want to learn or need to learn about COVID for your particular search. So maybe you are concerned about recommendations for high-risk individuals. You'll want to make sure that whatever you're looking at is framed through that. There's going to be different recommendations for different populations, so just sort of considering that when you're looking at everything. And Mark and I are going to go into this more, but again, this is all sort of pieces of a whole piece and very contextual and should be looked at together. So this is a lot to consider with, any article, any publication, any website that we're reading. So next, Mark is going to share sort of some steps that you can use to methodically move through evaluating a source related to COVID.
Yeah, so thanks, Molly. Again, as we go, if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. We may not get to them until the end, but feel free to add any questions there. I just want to remind folks of that. So the bulk of the presentation today will kind of largely pull from one researcher's work. The person is named Mike Caulfield, and you can see here, his bio. His day job, he's the director of blended network learning at Washington State University, Vancouver. But as you can see from this just short paragraph, he has been featured all over the place. He's run the Digital Polarization Initiative, which I would encourage you to look up if you're not familiar with it. He has published a very popular open textbook called Web Literacy for Student Fact Checkers that I know many in the library are familiar with, in addition to his work. But he coined a method that he uses with students, and it's called the SIFT method. And it stands for like stopping or slowing down, investigating the source, finding better or trusted coverage, and then finally tracing claims, quotes, media, etc., back to their original context. And that'll be a recurring theme today, as Molly alluded to. Lots of, putting context back around things that are often decontextualized, as is so often common with information that you find on the web. But we're going to go through each one of these one by one. He's been working on the SIFT method since around 2017. And he kind of frames them as 4 moves, and that in his experience and research with students, he's seeing that students are coming to better judgments about sources and claims in, around 90 seconds than they used to in about 20 minutes when they would use things like the CRAP test. And if you're a faculty member, you're in the library world, the CRAP test is sort of an older checklist model, a checklist approach that he has largely kind of moved past. And we are kind of embracing things like the SIFT method in our conversations with students, but really it's applicable for not just students in the classroom, but for everyone. And according to Caulfield, the exciting part about all this is that because he's framing these as habits, he feels like they have a shot at changing student behavior outside the classroom. So students, in his experience, are carrying with them these habits outside the class and kind of using them in their everyday lives. And that's why we thought it was useful to kind of follow his approach. And some of these things, as you'll see, are very almost, it's common sense. It's very simple. But sometimes when you're on the web or you see someone post something on social media, it's easy to kind of let your emotions sort of like take front and center, take the front seat, and without kind of stopping and putting some of these habits to work really can help save some time and energy in terms of whether or not the information that you're looking at is valid or not, and it can help you maybe educate others as well. Molly, you can move on. Thanks.
Yeah, so Mark mentioned, well, this is the first move, slow down and stop. And Mark sort of alluded to this one a bit because I think this one on its premise is sort of simple. And it's also, again, very much acknowledging the emotional response that we can have to media. And I very much agree, this is not just students, it's all of us. We sort of discovered in the icebreaker with Mentee that we all have a lot of information available to us that is coming at us on many fronts, especially related to COVID. I mean, many of us are spending more times in our homes in front of our computer. I'm getting, articles sent to me via text, via email, via social media, and then just my own searching out on the web. So, what to do when you have so much information coming at you. So what the slow down and stop move is sort of recognizing is to take a minute before you even have a response to the information, to the article. And if you are having a strong emotion to the article, perhaps just acknowledge that. There are plenty of articles with headlines that are intentionally eliciting emotion, COVID cases on the rise, and if you don't do this now, it's the end of the world. I'm obviously exaggerating, but that's not too far from the truth. So rather than sharing that quickly or taking that as fact, sort of taking some time to move through the other steps. Another thing to do if you are responding strongly to an article, just the first bits of it, is to stop and sort of look at what else is out there. If you do a quick Google, are you finding a lot of other sources that are saying that it's the end of the world, and if you don't do this, then it's the end times? Then you might want to take a step back. But with that in mind, when you start to do that, it can be easy to go down a rabbit hole. You click on one link, leads to another link, leads to another link. So also acknowledging what your intention is, what you are trying to confirm, what information you are trying to seek out, to sort of have your path be more structured than a random search on the internet.
Okay, so once you've kind of checked your emotions a bit, spending time, as Molly suggested, investigating the source is really key here. Caulfield offers a couple of quick strategies you can put to use. Of course, just doing some general Googling about the author, on the author or the publication, is certainly one tip. But one thing that he demonstrates that, again, for students and really any of us who are in a time crunch, these can take, these moves can take up to 90 seconds, or a couple of minutes at most to kind of check or verify some of these. So he terms the Wikipedia trick something that could be useful. You know, most credible news organizations and some that aren't so credible will have Wikipedia pages, and usually they'll give you some information about the source. So one of the examples that we have here is from a British newspaper. And Molly, I don't know if you want to click that, or if I can share my screen and take over either one. But this is a story from a few months ago, and from a British newspaper, and it kind of goes into the real cause of the outbreak claim, which, you know, is that the virus came from a lab in Wuhan, which we know that that has been debunked, but there was a time when this conspiracy or rumor was floating around the internet that it was cooked up in a lab and was released. But you know, something that Caulfield suggests is erasing, basically in your browser's address bar, just erasing the end of the URL or the address up through the actual just website address for the full website. So if Molly, would you do that?
Would you like me to do that?
Sure. Up through, yeah, the slash, and then delete that. Thank you. And then type Wikipedia. And this is, again, what Caulfield shares with his students. And it'll quickly take you to the Daily Express's Wikipedia page, where you can find out a bit more about the paper, that it is a tabloid, that it does have a political slant, that is, you know, does not, you know, attempt to be bias-free in its reporting. So, you know, we tell students often that Wikipedia is bad, we shouldn't consult Wikipedia, but we've started to embrace Wikipedia as a place to offer some of that necessary context for sources. You can find out about the readership, a bit about the political slant of sources potentially, you know, budgetary information, things like that. So that's, you know, a strategy that, you know, any of us can kind of check on if we're really uncertain about the source. Now, not everything has a Wikipedia page, but, you know, it's very common now that many, you know, publications and websites do have Wikipedia pages that give you, you know, a user some context about that source. So that's one trick that Caulfield does suggest. We can go back now to the slide. Another thing that Caulfield suggests, and we won't demonstrate this, is, and this is very true when you're on social media, for example, if you're on Twitter, is that you can hover to get some information about the source. So you would hover your mouse over the link to the user profile. If you're on your computer, like in your desktop browser, or if you're in your mobile phone, you can, or device, you can click it. And you know, you can find out a bit more about the person who posted the information. So you may want to ask yourself things like, is this source what I thought it was? Or is it credible enough to share without further checking, you know, sharing more widely on social media? And I, you know, would recommend hovering every time, not just if you're suspicious, because it tells you a bit more about the person or entity posting this information. But again, the key idea here is to kind of know what you're reading almost before you read it. Doesn't mean that you have to, you know, do a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigation into a source before you engage with it. But, you know, if you're reading a piece on economics by a Nobel Prize-winning economist, you should know that. Or if you're watching a video on the benefits of milk consumption that was put out by the dairy industry, you should also know that too. You might want to know that, you know, because it could color, you know, what you think about, you know, how that information is framed or presented. But again, getting off the website that makes the claim or the source and seeing what else the web has to say is really kind of the takeaway here. So, move on. And, you know, kind of, again, these habits build on one another, right? So sometimes you don't really care. You may not care as much about the article itself, but you really are more interested in the claim that the article or source might be making, maybe more if it's true or false. You may want to find out if it represents more of a consensus viewpoint or if it's kind of the subject of disagreement. So in this case, you know, you really want to kind of spend some time looking for other sort of trusted reporting or analysis on whatever claim that source might be making. So, you know, to do that, you'd want to kind of get out and do essentially like a Google News search or a Yahoo News search to find a bit more, or just general Googling as well. I mean, you don't necessarily have to agree with the consensus if it is something that is a bit more political. but you really want to kind of spend time, understanding the context and history of a particular claim someone might be making, and that'll help you better evaluate it, kind of down the road. Something else that Caulfield suggests, especially for images now, because images are deep faked and doctored a bit more than they used to be, is Google allows you to do reverse image searching. And I've read that Google is trying to enhance its algorithm to help when people do reverse image searching to find out whether or not an image has been doctored. I'm not really sure of the current status of that, like how far along they are, but I do know that is in progress. But sometimes I can tell you a lot. But even sometimes you may find images that maybe haven't been doctored but have been miscaptioned. So again, finding where the image originated, or if it's been reported about in other places, that can kind of give you some ideas on whether or not it's been doctored or not. So I think that these, and some of the sources that we have listed here on this slide, PolitiFact, factcheck.org, NewsGuard, they're all, they all tend to be, neutral sources that do present, that do debunk, false information that floats around the web. And actually, the link there, Find Better or Trusted Coverage, links to the Snopes article. Molly, if you wouldn't mind clicking that. Snopes is another great resource. And this Snopes article actually debunks those origin stories of COVID-19, being cooked up in a Chinese lab somewhere, and that's actually how I found the previous article that we were looking at from the British tabloid, was through Snopes. So if you find something that is suspect, kind of building that list of trusted resources that you can use to debunk and fact check is really essential, especially when you're dealing with things like COVID-19. So if you want to go back now and move on, thanks.
So this is the fourth move, and I don't know if we're allowed to have favorite moves, but this one is my favorite, not sure why. I think I like the very exploratory bit related to this one. So in regards to the fourth move, it's tracing any claims, quotes, or media back to the original context. So, very much even outside of COVID, information is often shared with us lacking context. And that could be for any number of reasons. Maybe the article just doesn't have time to fully share the context, or it could be intentional, trying to only give you a piece of the story so that they can persuade you in some way. So as examples, there could be a video of a fight between two people, or a video of really anything, and you're only seeing a piece of it. You're not seeing sort of what happened before to cause that fight. So if we can trace that video back to the original, that would be helpful, or finding out any additional information. There could also be images. We're probably pretty familiar with this happening. Mark mentioned deep fakes that happen, taking images and editing them. The ability to do this is so easy online now, to be able to take an image and put something else on it, or even to miscaption it. And it starts getting spread around, and it becomes, very common, even though it is not. And then other ways that this is done is by sharing, pieces of quotes from either another article or even a scientific journal. And I mean, librarians, I know, we're very familiar with this, the constant studies show or studies say, and I'm finding that happening a lot with COVID. So, we can look at even, pre-COVID, such headlines or even claims from an article. If I did a search for health benefits of red wine, right, I would get anything from drinking 1 glass of red wine a day improves your IQ to drinking 1 glass of red wine a day gives you cancer. So, being able to find some context for those types of claims. And again, this is happening a lot with COVID. A lot of what I read sort of says studies show, and really not giving me much nuance. So just sort of looking at an example of this. So this is an article that I found, and there's a headline: scientists say COVID-19 mutation, more contagious than original strain, is increasing at alarming rate. and I can see some information that we've talked about previously here. I'm assuming that since it says scientists say, that there is going to be some further information about those scientists or about the research. Honestly, I find it problematic if there's no link at all to the research with the scientists. Fortunately, oftentimes there is, but that still doesn't mean that you can trust the source. You sort of need to see how they are summarizing things and if that makes sense within the context of the article. So I can click here to see sort of what their source is. And you can see this contains, pieces that most of us are familiar with from a scientific publication, summary, introduction, conclusion. But what I've actually seen on a lot of publications, not just this one, and I could, Google this. I'm not a biologist, so I don't know this publication. That could be a step as well, Googling the publication. But I actually see a statement here. BioRev is receiving many new papers on coronavirus, SARS. A reminder, these are preliminary reports that have not been peer-reviewed. They should not be regarded as conclusive, guide clinical practice, health-related behavior, or be reported in news media as established information. It literally says should not be reported as established information. And if I go back to this article, I know we're not all reading it right now, but this is very much reporting it as established information. So again, just looking at sort of how they're framing and contextualizing any of the science right now. I just wanted to quickly share an article that I was actually looking at the other day. This is a ProPublica article, and it very much is talking about the science. And just the way that it's being framed is a lot different from the article we were just looking at. It links to several studies that you can click on, sort of scroll down, but it's showing us what 2 studies say right here, but then it's also showing us, frustratingly, at least 1 study has contrary findings. To me, that's, very much, I think someone mentioned in the intro that if you're not acknowledging limitations, then that's problematic. This article, is very much acknowledging that the science is not saying one thing, this is what we have right now. So sort of a comparison of those 2. Mark mentioned in the last move, the reverse image search. And I also just wanted to show an example of that as well in regards to the context and finding the original search. As many of us know, depending on when you started your day and started ingesting news, you probably have seen that Watauga is now requiring face masks. And there are, a lot of opinions on face masks and those types of things. And this actually, so I have 2 images here on this page, and this one actually showed up in my social media, this one on the left, that face masks can cause carbon dioxide toxicity. And I believe this was a heavily circulated image as well regarding masks and carbon dioxide poisoning. What I found by sort of doing some research is that the image is correct. This is the original image. I did some searching using the moves to discover the author is a doctor. However, this is the original image. It's just talking about the symptoms of carbon dioxide poisoning. And then this caption was added without, any scientific data that wearing face masks is related to that. So again, just sort of taking all of that information that we're being presented with and investigating it a little bit further, especially if it's giving us some strong emotions. So
there's just Joe's car now.
What was that?
Joe took my car.
I'm gonna mute you, John. I think you're unmuted. There we go. Okay.
So again, thank you, Molly. Those examples are, just sure the tip of the icebergs, right? So certainly, you want to be careful, with your friends and family members as they're sharing information, during the pandemic, and even information related to, protests and things that are happening now with things related to Black Lives Matter. I've been reading lots of information about, rampant social media rumors about Antifa coming to, ransack your town and things like that have largely been debunked again and again. I've read 2 articles in the last week about that subject alone. So, this isn't specific to COVID-19. You can apply this in other contexts as well. So just, kind of being careful, checking those emotions, kind of going through these 4 moves. Again, slowing down and stopping, investigating the sources, using those techniques of the Wikipedia trick, or hovering, finding better or trusted coverage, kind of seeing what other, sources have to say about particular claims, and of course, kind of swimming back upstream to the originals. All of those involve putting context back around lots of images and stories and claims that are made online. I mean, that's the web. It is a very decontextualized place. So taking a moment or a beat to do that is incredibly important. And as we've demonstrated, this doesn't take long. This doesn't have to take hours to do. It only takes, a couple of moments to kind of put context around things, to find that if there are agendas at stake, and finding out, who the person actually is, what is their expertise, things like that are really important. So, sometimes you're going to find out things are wrong, just completely wrong, or sometimes you're going to find out that there's some bad actors, kind of working through here and putting stuff out there, on bad stuff out there on purpose. I mean, sometimes it's a mistake or it's a prank even, so you just kind of have to take everything with a grain of salt. Molly, do you have anything to add on that?
No, I don't. I think just sort of repeating your point of the importance of applying this to not just COVID, but really anything that you care about the accuracy as well. If it's something that is very much a current event, then it's going to be something that has so much information on it. And no, you don't need to use the 4 moves on absolutely everything that you take in, but especially if you're going to share it, then I would encourage that you spend a little bit more time applying the 4 moves or some other method before passing that information along. So
yeah, and even if you do encounter a claim that you find is debunked, even kind of sharing a Snopes article. My parents, I'll use them as an example. They don't know this, but they, in a phone call with them, they told me that Chuck Norris had died due to COVID-19, and I immediately, after I got off the phone with them, went to Snopes and found out that that was a hoax. That Chuck Norris was alive and well. And I immediately texted them and with the Snopes article, to kind of let them know that. So also, in addition to kind of checking it for your own sanity, being willing to kind of share, when things are debunked, sharing that information back, posting it online, or even messaging people privately is really important. And we've got some resources that we pulled together,
yeah.
in addition to the ones that we've already shared. Again, we'd shared Snopes and NewsGuard, and ProPublica is one that Molly mentioned, PolitiFact. But these are some COVID-specific resources that Molly and I curated, and we are going to share this this slideshow after the fact, and of course the recording is going to be available. But John Wiswell, who's on the call or in the presentation today, has put together a really rich, wonderful guide for COVID-19 research and resources. And John, if you have anything to share about that guide, feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I just added Mike Caulfield up to the top, so.
Oh,
Great.
cool. Thanks,
Thank
John.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it.
No,
Yeah, and the library has sort of a continuity guide. And I know that John's guide is linked there. I'm not sure, John, is it linked anywhere else on the library's website?
No, but at least in the early days of the pandemic, I would check and see if the searches were at least bringing it up on the first page or 2. So
Okay, perfect.
it's pretty easy if you just search COVID, at the university or library search box.
Gotcha. Thank you. So the second, we're not going to go through all of these. I just really like this one. It's very visual. If you have any particular reason that you would need some visuals, this was created by the World Health Organization, and it takes some very common coronavirus myths and sort of debunks them in a very visual way. So, can people wear masks while exercising? Can shoes spread COVID-19? those types of things. So, you know, if you do have another audience that you might be reaching out to or trying to communicate with, some of these visuals might be handy, or they might just be a nice alternative to looking at black and white text. And you wanted me to click on one of the local resources, is that correct, Mark?
Sure, yeah, either the Raleigh one or the Watauga Democrat one. Both of those I've found, being new to the Boone area myself. I've been here less than a year, and I've been very encouraged by the Watauga Democrats coverage. A lot of their coverage, comes from the local health department, but also from the Raleigh News and Observer. So the Raleigh News and Observer is if you're not familiar, is the sort of this, it's published down in the Triangle area, and it's essentially the statewide newspaper. And for my money, they've been really keeping tabs on case counts and things. And I visit their website about once a day at least. And they kind of, in many cases, they're ahead of the official number count. And I found that both the Watauga Democrat, the Charlotte Observer, other newspapers around the state really have sourced the Raleigh News and Observer's reporting. So they've really been on top of things. And a lot of their content is behind the paywall, but their COVID-specific resources have been made available for free. That said, the library does have databases. I believe our Newsbank database does allow you to access content from the News and Observer and Charlotte Observer and other newspapers for free. So that's one resource you could consult as well. But we'll pause there and see what questions people have or comments.
Yeah, so while we're waiting for folks to ask questions or give comments, I know we had some people trickle in. I'm just going to share it once more. The link where this recording will be available. And this will include the presentation that has all of the links and resources that we're sharing.
Questions, comments, stories that people want to share about COVID-19 hoaxes that they've encountered?
Yeah, I really liked Mark's very kind and not combative Snopes story with his parents. If anyone else has a similar encounter with, combating fake news and those types of things, it would be nice to hear. Or any general questions, of course.
Well, I guess we did our job.
I guess so. Yeah, we'll hang out for a couple minutes in case anyone does have anything they'd like to share, but we sort of kept this under an hour on purpose. So if you would like to leave now, you're welcome to, if you don't have anything additional. Thank you all for attending. We really appreciate it, and hopefully this benefited you in some way.
For sure. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. We really appreciate it. And if you have questions, after the fact, feel free to get in touch. We're happy to help in any way that we can. Here's our email addresses.
Thanks for the thanks, everyone. Very kind.
Please stay safe out there and don't take any chances. All right, I'm going to stop the recording.
Sure. I think everyone's trickling out, so Mark and I are probably going to leave soon.